The Dowager Princess of Equestria, Celestia, has written a 1.7 million world memoir reflecting upon her life called Celestia Sunrise Sunset. She narrated all 250 hours of narrative herself, and the following excerpt is from the 120th chapter entitled The Twilight Saga. Ah, the Twilight Saga years. How fondly I remember. Of course, during such times, it was much harder for me to acquiesce, which is a fancy word for accepting of something reluctantly for all of you uneducated Earth Pony listeners out there. Don't worry, I know the majority of you can't read anyway. Twilight was a formidable unicorn, and when I first met her, I knew there was going to be some difficulty regining her in. That right there is called a pun. As we all know, she eventually became the reigning princess of Equestria, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, aren't I? Let's start at her beginning. When Twilight Sparkle first tested to be a part of my school for gifted unicorns, she exhibited great power. I was more than delighted to take her under my wing at such a remarkable show of magic, but my tutelage did not go as according to plan. You see, I was determined to release my dear sister Luna from the moon, but would need an impressive amount of power to do so. Do you really expect me to wait until of 1,000th year willingly? Unfortunately, the last unicorn I trained to help me, Sunset Shimmer, was a little too power mad to control, so I had to banish her to another realm entirely and tried all over again. Twilight Sparkle was the opposite problem, because she had such an annoying sense of morality for me to contend with. Eventually, she got proved to be less of an ally for such matters, but by the time I realized that, I knew I may as well just wait for the 1,000 year mark. The book Predictions and Prophecies said, and I quote, "The stars will aid their escape." Of course, I wrote that myself. The sun is a star, isn't it? And I fully intended to aid Luna in her escape, so it wasn't as if I were lying, per se. The longest day of the 1,000th year gave me more magic to be able to use my sister at last. It's the longest day, therefore my power would be at its strongest. Truly I'm confused that no pony else has riddled this out for themselves, but I suppose it was just the educational system established following its facilities. On that day, Twilight was the biggest thorn in my side. I couldn't have her muck up my plans to restore my sister to the world, so I sent to her that little uneasy-assuming podunk out of town Ponyville and instructed her to make friends, something she was never be able to do effectively in Canterlot. I'm sure you see the logic here, right? If she couldn't make any friends with her classmates, what chance does she have in one day with stranger ponies? Pleased with my plan, I immediately set to work and successfully released my sister from her in person. I expected her to see her right away, but as she wasted her time announcing herself to Ponyville out of all places, how that little nuisance Twilight was able to magically make friends and defeat my sister once a day was beyond me. But at least my sister was magical MacGuffin it led to the ground, and would be therefore easier to control. Of course, now I had to commit to the bit with Twilight, so I urged her to stay in Ponyville. For over 1,000 years, I've been plotting and planning to wreak my vengeance on Equestria for corrupting my sister's sensibilities, leading her to ultimate banishment. Nightmare Night was an insult, and as stupid as Summer in Celebration Sun, yes, mock and cheer my pain. Little ponies, that will certainly make me empathetic ruler. For those of you reading and not listening to this memoir, that was sarcasm. Therefore, a front of that just yet. Even so, my sister has returned to me, and all should been well, right? I hate to burst your little bubble, but it's not quite as easy. I lost 1,065,000 nights of sleep over Luna, and my sister lost 1,000 years of life. No Equestria still needs to pay. I would enact my revenge and steal away with Luna to the land of alicorns, where we belonged anyway. Besides, with my faithful student parading around the savior of Equestria, if something were to go wrong, she would be blamed partly, right? Truthfully, I had no faith in her whatsoever, but I still took precautions. Firstly, I recovered the elements of harmony from Twilight and her instant friends, under the guise of keeping them safe. Yeah, right, with the elements safely in my possession, I came up with my next plan of action. Discord. He was formidable foe for my sister and I back in the day. Hell, we almost lost him to the first time we have encountered him. I figured this reoccurrence would be too troublesome for Twilight, so I set back to work on breaking him out of stone. I released a Draconic quest and not so casually discussed the whereabouts of the elements of harmony to my guards. While I knew he was listening, I couldn't just destroy him right out of every pony watching, especially Luna, who was trailing behind every step, begging for forgiveness. At first, everything went swimmingly. Twilight and her friends came to Canterlot for the elements, but oh no, the elements were missing. How tragically unforeseen. I impressed upon Twilight and the importance of stopping discord, and with a quick good luck to my little ponies, the fate of Equestria is in your hooves. I was absolved of responsibility. I was feeling confident in my deception that I decided to really rub salt in the wound of my plans for vengeance. Were pretty much the fact that Twilight's failure. I sent all of Twilight's useless friendship reports, cruel and unnecessary. Perhaps my plans were nearing their completion, and I was giddy with anticipation. That giddiness was folly. Twilight wasn't demoralized by them. She took them by sending her my support, and she could rise against discord with that added confidence. Do you know how sick with disgust I was when I had publicly honored Twilight and her friends again for their good deeds? My next plot was far more better conceived. I decided to take upon a gamble of Twilight was too risky. She was annoyingly good at countering my plans. Instead, I preyed upon Canterlot, indirectly upon myself. How could any pony believe I would put myself in harm's way? I had a few options in mind of the threat to use, eventually settled up on the changelings. Up until that point, I'd kept a protection spell on Equestria to keep any changeling from entering our borders. I'm not practically fond of neighbors. All I had to do was lift that spell and send a few guard scouts in that general direction to garner some interest. At first, this seemed to be too perfect of a plan. Of course, I knew more Candizena had been taken. I'm no fool. I was patiently waiting for the moment that Chrysalis would reveal herself so I could face her in battle. I would make a big show of losing said battle before making my hasty retreat with Luna. I'd been keeping Luna on some pretty heavy sedatives during the daylight hours so she couldn't do something foolish like protect ponies effectively. No pony ever noticed my sister's absence in all of my wedding plans anyway. What I did count on was the horrid goop cocoon incapacitating my magic entirely. How was I supposed to know changeling magic would be strong enough to contain me? Oh well, Candenza and her moron shining armor used the power of love or some sort of nonsense at the end. Anyway, their magic was even more powerful than the elements of harmony, and that was a problem. Next, I brought back the Crystal Empire and saved Cadence and the idiot away. I knew they'd be no match for Sombra, as not even the magic element can defeat him. As expected, they never returned. I forged in concern and sent Twilight and her friends there next. The two annoying birds with one stone, am I right? I even took a step further to ensure that they would fail by turning it into a test for Twilight. I did this so I could discourage her from using her friends for help, as she had done for Nightmare Moon and Discord. An even more perfect plan that ended in a perfectly awful failure. The biggest takeaway from this failure, however, was the relationship between myself and my sister. Luna was starting to catch wise to keep me and myself from the efforts to save Equestria, so I brought her into my confidence. While she was intentionally against the idea, all it took was a little day's reminder of attitudes and actions of the ponies for her banishment to rekindle and the hatred that she had paid for them. From then on, she became an ally. He had a few ideas herself, but they were inferior to my own, so I had paid them a little head. Sick to death, looking at my failures in the face, I encouraged them. No demand Kenziza and her royal half-wit of a husband to rule Crystal Empire and stay the hell away from Canterlot. My next plan had to be even sneakier. Since Twilight and her friends were touting friendship so much, I decided to give him a little impossible friendship task, reforming Discord. He had been beaten them once, if not for my own idiocy. Who was to say he couldn't try it? I gave him the task to the Quiet One directly, knowing her sensitivity was most vulnerable, yet somehow impossible the way she pulled it off. She was eating out of her hoof by the time I checked on her progress. This was becoming absolutely absurd. I realized that if I were going to take out Equestria, I had to take out those pesky ponies first. For my sixth attempt, I decided rather than bringing back past villains to run amok, I would attack the problem at its source with the elements of harmony. If the elements were rendered useless, Twilight and her friends would be, and the next plan would be sure succeed. So I gave my former pupil another impossible task, fixing Star Wars Swirl's spell centuries ago. Luna and I had attempted to do the same, and rather than unlock the element's potential, we accidentally rendered them unusable. Of course, as bad luck would have it, Twilight pulled it off hardly without any trouble. By then I was no longer bewildered for her feats of magic and morality. It just arranged them, and within my castle in Canterlot, I could feel the waves of Twilight's spell upon the spell's completion. Ever that quick wit, I magicked myself into the realm of magic she had been taken to, and took credit for her alicorn eye flying. I was so happy about it? Not necessarily. But I knew her elevated status as a princess would be a great distraction more than the hindrance to me. Since Twilight's element was now a permanent part of her crown, I would need to think of another way to rid of her myself. Luna asked me how I rid Equestria of my former pupil, and I realized I had the answer all along. The mirror to another dimension. Why hadn't I thought of that sooner? I banished Sunset years ago, and she never resurfaced again. I'd be overthinking this revenge against Twilight, and decided to dispose of her rather than destroy her. Of course, Sunset discovered the portal before I could be rid of Twilight, so I ran with it. I made Twilight go in alone. Once again, trying to ruin the friendship aspect of magic. The little dragon followed her, and I'm certain that's why the plan didn't succeed. You cannot imagine how infuriating it was to see her come back successful, and with another budding new friendship with Sunset Shimmer. Well, if I couldn't attack the elements directly, I would need to do it indirectly by destroying the Tree of Harmony. Only Luna and I knew of the tree's existence, so no pony would catch me draining it of its magic. Well, we all know how that ended up, don't we? I successfully weakened the tree, but it was then attacked and captured by the Plant of All Things. How was I supposed to know Discord had planted these plunder seeds all those centuries ago? You'd think I'd be happy that Twilight and her friends rescued my sister and I from the clutches of those vines, but I was equally annoyed. Where the elements were brought back on the tree, now making it stronger than ever, any attempts to weaken it would be fruitless. Now I had an OCD and anxiety-riddled new princess to deal with on top of grappling with the elevated state of magic might. I'll admit my next plan was probably my worst one. I wasn't thinking clearly, right? I was depressed and suffering under the insistent whining of my former student turned into princess and starting to butt heads again with my sister. Seems like she's been working through her trauma and wasn't as anti-Equestria as I thought. Rather than try to figure this out who would be next advisory for Twilight, I just went shopping in hell. Oh, excuse me, Tartarus. Trek took the formidable. He had quite a rap sheet. What could go wrong? Well, once everything had started to get out of control, every pony was looking for me for answers and assistance, so I had no choice but to play along. I do think it was the first time I truly rooted for her to succeed. If anything, it did convince Luna I was trying to turn over a new leaf in regards to Twilight and her friends, and how I viewed all of Equestria if I was pro-Purple Princess for this assistance. Then I must have been planning to be going forward, right? Oh, the naivety of youth. After Trek and I needed a break, I stopped caring what Twilight and her peon friends were up to. I heard about some enchanted map thing and something about a unicorn dictator, but fuck Equestria. But I didn't really tune in for any of that nonsense. Didn't even know the pony's name until it showed up on my Switch cutie mark, with Luna's for some stupid friendship lesson. The nerve of that peasant sunshine glitter, or was it sunlight glamour? I've been downing about Twilight for far too long. I could continue explaining anyways. I sabotaged her, such as slipping that book into Sunburst to release it to the Pony of Shadows, or setting EEA against Twilight and her friendship school, establishing the Tartarus Pen Pal program. But it's all so frightfully boring from this point on. Seriously, even I was getting tired of used to these ponies and their adventures, so I conceded their fate. I decided rather than work against Twilight, I would use her instead. I would retire with Luna, and the whole world believing that this glorious goddess of goodness and grace the entire time. The funny thing is, though, is I haven't actually tried to save Equestria since my sister was banished. When I tried to do after announcing my retirement, I actually had, fun. It was thrilling to be pitted against the odds and face down of danger. His is why, dear readers, or listening mud ponies, I am the final and most powerful reformed villain in the end. I actually wanted Twilight and her masses to save Equestria from the troublesome trio. Encasing them in some stone was the best way to cover my tracks. Forever concealing my blame until now, of course. You may be wondering why I would disclose such secrets to the population now and then that would be such under scrutiny. Well, it's because the very pupil I represented for so long. Twilight finally figured out it was I who pretty much released Nightmare Moon after a banishment. It took me a few years, but she finally did it. Luna and I appealed to her soft and hard sensible responsibilities, and pardon me, was the end. It was the betterment of pony kind. In my own way, I am Equestria's true savior by giving her and her friends such power and prestige, so a pardon was the least she could do. Twilight eventually agreed, and I made sure the wording of the written pardon absolved me in any way of all my crimes committed during my region. So if you're worried that I'm stressing how this would reflect upon my character, fret not. I am quite content with the outcome of things, regardless of what you may think of me. It's because of my actions that ponykind has indeed prospered. Besides, no PR is bad PR, and I intended for this memoir to captivate audiences all the way up to Canterlot bestsellers list. Moreover, I do not let the opinions of peasantry concern me. Now, with all this Twilight nonsense behind us, I can recount and rewrite about the fascinating saga of the pot-bellied toads and how their influence shaped their early retirement. A subject which, I am sure you'll agree, is frighteningly more fascinating than this past one. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.